For June 1942, but before the sun rose over the vast Pacific, a terrifying question was already drifting above the steel decks of American carriers like a ghost. What happens to a medic's soul when he must choose who lives, who dies, and who disappears into a burning sea? On the morning of the Battle of Midway, the air was thick with the stink of diesel, sweat, and the electric tension of men who knew they were outnumbered, outgunned, and positioned against one of the most powerful naval forces ever assembled. Yet as scouts confirmed the Japanese fleet's approach, it wasn't the admirals or pilots who felt the first wave of dread. It was the medics stationed below deck, already preparing for a storm of casualties they feared would swallow the entire task force. When the first Japanese dive bombers screamed downward, their engines shrieking like metallic banshees, the decks of the USS Yorktown erupted into firestorms that sent twisted fragments of steel slicing through flesh. Medics, crawling low as bombs shook the ship, dragged half-conscious sailors across floors slippery with blood and seawater, while overhead bulkheads buckled like tin under the pressure of the blasts. One medic, Samuel Patch Hawkins, later described how a corridor filled with smoke suddenly began to whisper. The eerie sound of trapped sailors pounding from the other side of a sealed hatch as the fire grew hotter, their muffled screams mixing with the wail of damage alarms until the metal was too hot to touch, forcing him to live with the knowledge that he could not save them. Meanwhile, topside, pilots launched in a rush that felt like an execution order. Entire torpedo squadrons were wiped out, their planes turned to falling comets by Japanese Zero fighters, and the few pilots who bilayed out landed in oil-slicked waters lit by burning wreckage, yelling for rescue while Japanese machine gun fire stitched the waves around them. Medics on the decks could only watch in horror as some pilots drifted beyond reach, their cries fading before the ocean claimed them, the smell of scorched fuel mixing with the sharp, metallic bite of blood as sharks, drawn by the carnage, circled beneath the survivors. Yet even amid this nightmare, the tide began to shift when American dive bombers from USS Enterprise and USS Yorktown broke through the enemy's defensive screen at the perfect moment, finding Japanese decks crowded with refueling aircraft. The resulting explosions tore open the sky, and medics aboard U.S. carriers braced for the injured pilots who staggered back, some still smoking from cockpit flames, others wide-eyed with shock after witnessing enemy carriers erupt like volcanic islands. Below deck, the infirmary shook so violently that scalpels rolled off tables, lamps shattered and morphine vials cracked under the vibration. Still, medics worked with frantic precision, stitching shrapnel wounds, plunging needles into collapsing veins, gripping the hands of men whose breath rattled like dry leaves as they begged for messages to be delivered to mothers, wives, and children. When Yorktown was struck again, torpedoes ripping open her side like a monstrous claw, medics were thrown off their feet as seawater flooded compartments, rising fast and icy. They waded through chest-deep water to retrieve patients, hoisting them onto makeshift rafts, even as the ship listed so sharply that equipment slid across the floor like haunted debris. Some recalled hearing strange, echoing moans coming from the lower decks after the abandon ship order was given, sounds they never knew whether to attribute to wounded men trapped below or to the groaning death throes of the vessel itself. By the time the Japanese retreat began, 4 of their carriers had been destroyed, a blow so shocking it altered the course of the entire Pacific War, and the surviving medics, exhausted and hollow-eyed, stood surrounded by the floating wreckage of aircraft, lifeboats, and the bodies of friends who had only hours before joked about going home. They had witnessed a miracle built not only on strategy and bravery, but on the relentless struggle of those who fought death with bandages, needles, and sheer willpower, even as horror clawed at them from every direction. And now the final question remains. If you found yourself on that burning deck, listening to the sea whisper with the voices of the lost, would you have had the strength to run back into the smoke for one more dying soldier, knowing the flames were already reaching for you?